Hello, welcome to Bible study time and welcome to my quiet time Bible study. My Hebrew name is Ahava, and that is one of the many ways you can say love in the Holy Hebrew language. And this week we are going to continue with our read-along series, reading through the book of First Maccabees. But before I get into that, I wanted to share a book with you. When I went to the tea party with a few of the members of my Daughters of Zion group, I met a lovely lady named Lorraine, and her name is Lorraine Regisford, and she's written a book, very wonderful lady. She also sells some other products as well, and I'll see if I can link her Instagram handle below, along with some other Instagram handles of other content creators that I met there. Anyway, Lorraine Regisford, she has written this book called Next Chapter, Life After Divorce. And so I wanted to recommend this to you. I haven't read it yet, have a lot on my reading list currently, but I will just read the back of it. And then when I go through like a full book review and sort of make a testimony video in the future, I will share, hopefully if I've gotten through this book, I will share, my thoughts about it. But with this book, basically, I'll just read the blurb about Lorraine. Lorraine Regisford, as a founder of Life Matters, has worked over 30 years in human services. As a seasoned educator, she has designed curriculum and workshops for both public and private organizations. Lorraine studied play therapy in Toronto and France through Play Therapy Canada and Play Therapy UK in partnership with Leeds Beckett University. Okay, and so basically this book, the premise that she's writing from, it's a personal sort of testimony, is, what happens after you get divorced, especially if you are a follower of the way, like a believer. And it says, the fact that separation and divorce now happens to many people does not normalize it. Each circumstance is different. While staying sensitive to these differences, Next Chapter provides the reader with clear, straightforward information and recommendations in 3 areas: financial, social, and emotional. These universal truths will help you reframe your situation and set goals to enhance your life journey through this major life transition. And so I do recommend you guys get a copy. I have personally met her. She's a lovely lady. And once I read this book, I will get back to you. So this week, we are going to be continuing on with our read-along series from the first book of Maccabees, which is an apocryphal book, and I'm going to be reading from the New Oxford Annotated Bible, the New Revised Standard Version. I know some of you guys are like, what version? It's the New Revised Standard Version, okay? And this is the 5th edition, and this is what it looks like, okay? And so we are going to continue reading from chapter number 5. For those of you who do have this book, chapter 5 is on page 1699. And for those of you, if this is your first time clicking on this video, I do want to encourage you to go back through to the other videos on my channel, and within the first 2 or 3, it gives you a little bit of summary of what this book of Maccabees is about. Okay, so let's begin reading, and I want to start in verse 1 of chapter 5. And it reads, Then the king, completely inflexible, was filled with overpowering anger and wrath. So he summoned Herman, keeper of the elephants, and ordered him on the following day to drug all the elephants, 500 in number, with large handfuls of frankincense and plenty of unmixed wine, and to drive them in, maddened by the lavish abundance of drink, so that the Jews might meet their doom. When he had given these orders, he returned to his feasting together with those of his friends and of the army who were especially hostile toward the Jews. And Herman, keeper of the elephants, proceeded faithfully to carry out the orders. The servants in charge of the Jews went out in the evening and bound the hands of the wretched people and arranged for their continued custody through the night, convinced that the whole nation would experience its final destruction. For to the Gentiles it appeared that the Jews were left without any aid, because in their bonds they were forcibly confined on every side. But with tears and a voice hard to silence, they called upon the Almighty Lord and ruler of all power, their merciful God and ruler of all power, their merciful God and Father, praying that he avert with vengeance the evil plot against them, and in a glorious manifestation rescue them from the fate now prepared for them. So their entreaty ascended fervently to heaven. Herman, however, when he had drugged the pitiless elephants until they had been filled with a great abundance of wine and satiated with frankincense, presented himself at the courtyard early in the morning to report to the king about these preparations. But the Lord sent upon the king a portion of sleep, that beneficence that from the beginning, night and day, is bestowed by him who grants it to whomever he wishes. And by the action of the Lord, he was overcome by so pleasant and deep a sleep that he quite failed in his lawless purpose and was completely frustrated in his inexplicable plan. Then the Jews, since they had escaped the appointed hour, praised their holy God and again implored him, who is easily reconciled, to show the might of all his powerful hand to the arrogant Gentiles. But now, since it was nearly the middle of the 10th hour, the person who was in charge of the invitations, seeing that the guests were assembled, approached the king and nudged him. And when he had with difficulty roused him, he pointed out that the hour of the banquet was already slipping by, and he gave him an account of the situation. The king, after considering this, returned to his drinking and ordered those present for the banquet to recline opposite him. When this was done, he urged them to give themselves over to revelry and to make the present portion of the banquet joyful by celebrating all the more. After the party had been going on for some time, the king summoned Herman with sharp threats, demanding to know why the Jews had been allowed to remain alive through the present day. But when he, with the corroboration of the king's friends, pointed out that while it was still night, he had carried out completely the order given to him, the king, possessed by a savagery worse than that of Philarius, said that the Jews were benefited by today's sleep. But he added, "Tomorrow, without delay, prepare the elephants in the same way for the destruction of the lawless Jews." When the king had spoken, all those present readily and joyfully, with one accord, gave their approval, and all went to their own homes. But they did not so much employ the duration of the night in sleep as in devising all sorts of insults for those they thought to be doomed. Then, as soon as the cock had crowed in the early morning, Herman, having equipped the animals, began to move them along in the great colonnade. The crowds of the city had been assembled for this most pitiful spectacle, and they were eagerly waiting for daybreak. But the Jews, at their last gasp, since the time had run out, stretched their hands toward heaven, and with most tearful supplication and mournful dirges implored the supreme God to help them again at once. The rays of the sun were not yet shed abroad, and while the king was receiving his friends, Haman arrived and invited him to come out, indicating that what the king desired was ready for action. But he, on receiving the report and being struck by the unusual invitation to come out, since he had been completely overcome by incomprehension, inquired what the matter was for which this had been so zealously completed for him. This was the act of God, who rules over all things, for he had implanted in the king's mind a forgetfulness of the things he had previously devised. Then Haman and all the king's friends pointed out that the animals and the armed forces were ready. O king, according to your eager purpose. But at these words he was filled with an overpowering wrath, because by the providence of God his whole mind had been deranged concerning these matters. And with a threatening look he said, if your parents or children were present, I would have prepared them to be a rich feast for the savage animals instead of the Jews, who give me no ground for complaint and have exhibited to an extraordinary degree a full and firm loyalty to my ancestors. In fact, you would have been deprived of life instead of these, if it were not for the affection arising from our nurture in common and your usefulness. So Haman suffered an unexpected and dangerous threat, and his eyes wavered and his face fell. The king's friends, one by one, sullenly slipped away and dismissed the assembled people to their own occupations. Then the Jews, on hearing what the king had said, praised the manifest Lord God, King of Kings, since this also was his aid that they had received. The king, however, reconvened the party in the same manner and urged the guests to return to their celebrating. After summoning Haman, he said in a threatening tone, "How many times, you poor wretch, must I give you orders about these things? Equip the elephants now once more for the destruction of the Jews tomorrow." But the officials who were at the table with him, wondering at his instability of mind, remonstrated as follows: "O king, how long will you put us to the test, as though we are idiots, ordering now for a third time that they be destroyed, and again revoking your decree in the matter? As a result, the city is in turmoil because of its expectation. It is crowded with masses of people and also in constant danger of being plundered." At this, the king, hilarious in everything and filled with madness, took no account of the changes of mind that had come about within him for the protection of the Jews, and he firmly swore an irrevocable oath that he would send them to death without delay, mangled by the knees and feet of the animals, and would also march against Judea and rapidly level it to the ground with fire and spear, and by burning to the ground the temple, inaccessible to him, would quickly render it forever empty of those who offered sacrifices there. Then the friends and officers departed with great joy, and they confidently posted the army and the armed forces at the places in the city most favorable for keeping guard. Now, when the animals had been brought virtually to a state of madness, so to speak, by the very fragrant draughts of wine mixed with frankincense, and had been equipped with frightful devices, the elephant keeper entered at about dawn into the courtyard. The city now being filled with countless masses of people crowding their way into the hippodrome, and urged the king on to the matter at hand. So he, when he had filled his impious mind with a deep rage, rushed out in full force along with the animals, wishing to witness the invulnerable heart and with his own eyes the grievous and pitiful destruction of the aforementioned people. When the Jews saw the dust raised by the elephants going out at the gate, and by the following armed forces, as well as by the trampling of the crowd, and heard the loud and tumultuous noise, they thought that this was their last moment of life, the end of their most miserable suspense. And giving way to lamentation and groans, they kissed each other, embracing relatives and falling into one another's arms, parents and children and mothers and daughters, and others with babies at their breasts who were drawing their last milk. Not only this, but when they considered the help that they had received before from heaven, they prostrated themselves with one accord on the ground, removing the babies from their breasts, and cried out in a very loud voice, imploring the ruler over every power to manifest himself and be merciful to them, as they stood now at the gates of death. And this brings me to the end of chapter number 5 of First Maccabees. And of course, I would love to read chapter 6 because it's so fascinating, but we'll have to wait till our next reading to see what happens there. The Jews are now awaiting death. And I'm so grateful to the Most High Creator God for, reminding me to read through this book of Maccabees, live with you guys. And also, I'm going to have to make a whole video about this. I have a huge testimony. And I won't get into detail right now, but I must say publicly right now that I'm so grateful to the Most High Creator, God of all gods, God of all spirits, my God, Yahweh, for really proving to me over the past week and a half that prayer works and He is real. And so once we read through this book of First Maccabees, I am going to go into my testimony. I really have to sort of organize it and make sure that I touch on every single point, basically discussing a thorn that I have had in my side for a very long time that I laid down before the throne of grace, and the Most High Creator God answered my prayer. And one of the reasons I can't talk about it right now is because it's just so fresh. I'm so emotional, and I'm not really a fan of those individuals who cry online. And so I don't want to cry, but I will be bringing you that testimony soon. And so look out for that. I want anybody who is struggling with something that they've been praying for a really long time to look out for my upcoming video within the next month or so, with my testimony about how implementing the words and claiming the blessings and the promises from Scripture as a follower of the way, and laying all of your burdens before the throne of grace really works. Faith, with works, and trusting what this Holy Hebrew Bible says works. And I believe in the Most High, but with this situation, my mind is blown. So with that being said, I want to thank you guys for joining me on this video. And I want to remind you, before I say goodbye, that the Most High Creator, God of all gods, the God of all spirits, my God, Yahweh, loves all of his children.